to the Wu Jien Chuan podcast. My name is Isaac Kamens. This is a bi-weekly podcast where my friend Jess O'Brien and I discuss internal martial arts, qigong, and meditation. In this episode, we continue our discussion of the Wu style of Tai Chi. We look at Bruce Frantzis's Power of Internal Martial Arts for his version of Wu Jien Chuan's history and his connection to the Yang family. In the extended episode, we discuss large and small frames in great detail, and then also go into our own little bit of history of training with Bruce in the Wu style. Then we move over to the Tai Chi classics. We look at the phrase, stand like a scale, balance like a wheel. We get into a big, long discussion of double-weightedness, which is a pretty complicated concept in Tai Chi, as well as the concept of empty and full. And then we get into a longer discussion about the training in different styles and different schools of Tai Chi and the similarities and the differences, etc. All right, hope you enjoy the episode. Thanks for listening. Thanks for all your support, and take care of yourselves.
In today's episode, we're going to continue our look at Wu style Tai Chi trend and the various folks that have been involved in it over the years, especially Chuan Yu, the founder, and Wu Jien Chuan, the popularizer of the style. So I thought I'd start with a piece from The Power of Internal Martial Arts with E.K. Frantzis, where he talks about the history as he heard it. So during the time that Yang Luchan taught the Emperor's Guards, he had 3 top students. And this is something we've heard a couple times, right? There's always these 3 top students who represent different powers of Tai Chi. And each story is slightly different.
Right, there's the hard, the soft, and the chain.
Pretty much, yeah. But everyone has their little take on it. So he here says, Wang Chun was the most proficient with hard energy. Ling Shan, the best at using soft energy. And Chuan Yu, the most adept at transforming energy, the highest level of Tai Chi. After the fall of... Yeah, sorry.
It sounds like those first 2 guys didn't really go on to teach afterwards, like that they just kind of faded away. They weren't,
right.
They were palace guards. They weren't Tai Chi
right
teachers,
right exactly. Their job was being, working for the emperor, not like going out and popularizing Tai Chi. Yeah, which is I think there's we've stumbled across lots of stories of guys whose name get mentioned, but their style is either fizzled out or it's just in some small groups and family groups out there somewhere who don't publish much in English on the topic. Right. They're just sort of invisible in the public eye in the way that Wu Jien Chuan then became huge in the public eye.
Right. And in these guys' case, I think it was, they learned martial arts to do it as a guard, and they
as a job,
probably stayed there and, as long as they could.
Right. And then take their pension and split. They're not and even back in the day of Yang Luchan, Tai Chi may have first its name was getting out, but it hadn't become something that the average Joe was doing.
Right.
Till much later. But yeah, there's the 3 different guys. From there he says that after the fall of the Manchu Qing dynasty, Yang student Chuan Yu's family changed their Manchurian name to the Chinese name of Wu to be more politically in tune with the times. Chuan Yu's method of Tai Chi is still taught in Beijing, although not very widely, as he was primarily a working rather than a teaching martial artist. So that, like there, as you said, Chuan Yu himself was more of a palace guard than a popularizer. It was his son that went out and did a lot of the teaching. Yeah. And same with Yang Luchan, the founder, right?
Exactly, right. It's the second and third generation that takes it out of the palace, if you will.
Right. He says here, Chuan Yu passed all his knowledge onto his son, Wu Jien Chuan, who also learned from Yang Luchan's son, Ban Ho, teacher of many of the better Tai Chi fighters to emerge in the early part of the 20th century. So just thinking about that, there's the founder of Tai Chi, Yang Luchan. Chuan Yu is sometimes presented as his kind of right-hand man. They're kind of like buds, like they're the main guys. And then the son of Yang Luchan and the son of Chuan Yu then also collaborate.
Mm-hmm. Right. I remember last time we talked about that, Yang Luchan couldn't make Chuan Yu a disciple because he would have put him on the equal footing with the emperor, which was not, okay. So he had to it had to be his son who took him on as a disciple, right?
Right. Yeah, interesting. Yeah, so there's a lot of connections there. And once again, the name Banho comes up. Yang Banho. He's the toughest, the most fightingest of the early Tai Chi generation. Yeah. And here again, he says the early Tai Chi fighters were trained by Banho. So the son of Tren Yu is Wu Jien Chuan. Wu Jien Chuan taught along with the Yang family members at their association in Beijing before both he and Yang Chengfu left Beijing to spread Tai Chi to Shanghai and southern China. So that's interesting. It sounds so in Beijing. So Wu Jien Chuan grows up in Beijing alongside the Yang family members and is a teacher at their school.
Yeah, they had a school together for a short time.
And so that's that early Wu style that's founded in Beijing. And then, so then they both around the same time period start heading out to Shanghai and southern China. And I forget where I read it. It was a story of like, there was this feeling that Wu Jien Chuan was going out and like teaching and establishing a school. And then like Yang Chengfu was moving in right behind him and maybe like riding off of his efforts. Then Yang Chengfu was showing up and scooping up all kinds of students because Wu had already gotten it going. I could have sworn that was a James Wing Wu story.
It happened, yeah.
But, you know, it sounded like at that point, the schools were sort of branding themselves separately. So, yeah, clearly they're starting to split. Wu, however, was almost 20 years older than Yang Chengfu and more immersed in the martial way of the old Yang style. That's interesting. So Wu Jien Chuan is quite a bit older than Yang Chengfu, although I think Yang Chengfu dies fairly young. So maybe the sense is that they pass away in somewhere in the same era in the 30s, I think. So I think of them as being the same time period, but they aren't necessarily, you know, sounds like Wu's quite a bit older.
They were contemporaries and right. They were teaching at the same time, but that doesn't, you know, but
Yang Chengfu's more the student and Wu Jien Chuan's more the teacher.
Well, Wu was more the age of Yang's uncle or older brother, not, you know, kind of thing.
Well, that's kind of interesting because like Yang Banho is kind of the badass of the previous generation. But then the next generation, Wu Jien Chuan, is kind of more the enforcer. So it switches sides kind of at that point.
Well, I think, but see, I don't think there were sides yet. I mean, there wasn't Yang and Wu styles yet. Sure. There was, you know, different guys doing stuff that they
in Beijing, Wu Jien Chuan's teaching a class and Yang Chengfu's a teenager in that class, probably.
Yeah, but Wu wasn't calling what he did Wu style Tai Chi at that point. He was calling what he did, you know,
pretty much Yang Luchan's martial art. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we was just probably calling it Tai Chi and everybody knew that, man. That lineage came from Yang Luchan. There hadn't been, it's just like with Bagua, there hadn't been a split yet, you know.
Yeah, it's interesting to compare it to Bagua because it's kind of happening in the same time frame. Like the founders of both the martial arts were guys in Beijing who worked for the emperor who died in the late 1800s. And then their schools come out of that and go through that process of differentiating, schools splitting apart. Bagua probably splits apart sooner because it's not like a family style the way Yang is. Yang stays together longer perhaps, but they go through the process.
I think one of the things that makes Bagua unique is that
Dong Hai Chuan didn't have a son.
From the beginning, it wasn't about a hereditary thing. It was about
he's a eunuch. He can't have a son.
Right. So which
is odd. Do you know any other martial arts that are made by eunuchs? I don't know. I'm sure we must have talked about it then, but
that's kind of where with Tai Chi you had, you know, it was, in a sense, it was the same thing because you eventually get to a hereditary line, but initially it was the military thing of he's a guard, you know, he's teaching a bunch of guards, so he probably had who knows hundreds of students while he was employed as a guard, you know, a palace guard or whatever, and then you know, so each one of those guys who potentially could have gone off and started his own style of Tai Chi, but I think the vast majority of them didn't. And, you know, Wu was one of the few that did. And so you know, eventually they're like, well, we do it slightly different. Why don't we give it a different name so people stop thinking that we're doing the same thing, you know? So
Right. And you
Coke and
got to try
Pepsi,
to
well, you know,
keep your money in your pocket, not in the other guy's pocket.
right. But I mean, it happens now with companies all the
Hell
time,
yeah. Of
you know, it's like, well, I don't know.
course. Martial arts the same way. Yeah. All right. So next sentence. On many occasions, both Wu and Yang Cheng Fu did their Tai Chi forms together in demonstrations. And it has often been said that Wu sharpened Yang Cheng Fu's skills at push hands when they were together in Shanghai. So it sounds like they're still rolling together quite a bit. Like they're on the same stage demoing. That's pretty cool. And then showing push hands together. So it sounds like Wu is the superior push hand skill there.
Well, again, it goes back to being, you know, 20 years older.
Right. So now he says that Wu Jien Chuan became more involved with the small movement side of Tai Chi rather than the large and medium movement method of Yang Cheng Fu. The form movements Wu himself taught are basically the same as the modern Yang Cheng Fu form, as both of them collaborated. However, because the form is a small movement style, its movements are more compact. And because it derived from the old Yang style, it holds much of the old knowledge of fighting applications, with a strong stress on throwing techniques. Editor's note: the author learned this method from his teacher Liu Hongjae, who lived and studied with Wu Jien Chuan.
Right. So that's basically saying, you know, that they are, when he says they're the same form, it's the same sequence of movements, right? I mean, you look at
Pung goes first, grasp the bird's tail.
Right. If you look at the list, you know, if you take two written lists of the movements, they're going to basically be the same, you know.
Same order, yeah.
The way you do them is a little different, but like, you know,
exactly.
you can, you know, if you do one, you know, if you know a yang long form, it's not going to take you very long to plug in the movements of the Wu and vice versa, right?
You can follow a Wu class pretty well and keep up.
Yeah, because you can go, okay, well, you know, it's like learning, I don't know, it's like learning an alphabet or something. It's
cursive and regular, maybe.
There you go, yeah.
They're in the same order, but they look a little odd.
Mm-hmm.
And so this begins that discussion. Well, we've talked about it quite a few times, of the small versus large frames and so on. And I haven't studied Wu style extensively, but the few teachers I have visited with, and I've trained with you a bunch and Kumar, it does have the way it is done with like much smaller movements. You don't reach as far out. You don't shift forward as much. There's a lot of postures that are done forward weighted in Yang are done back weighted in Wu. And there's just a smaller size to the shape of the form itself and the applications.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of similarities and there's a lot of differences. It's like essentially you have large frame outside, small frame inside. So you can do like what Liu Hongjae was doing was not the typical Wu style. He did, from a Wu style perspective, an extremely extended thing. Like his postures were not close to his body.
I mean, could I argue a little bit that when you look at, like, there's a famous picture of Liu doing single whip. It looks a lot like Wu Jien Chuan's single whip. You're squatting way down, sticking your arms way out. I mean, they both have
He's
hella long stance.
I
mean, their arms stick way out their body. I'm just saying they look the same. He looks the same as Wu Jien Chuan
in certain postures, but
how he gets to him, is that the difference?
It's the overall kind of body structure. Like most things that Liu Hongjae did, they weren't exactly the
norm
way everybody else did it, you know. One theory that I heard is that part of that was because, you know, Liu Hongjae didn't start doing Tai Chi till after he did Bagua for 40 years. And he also came from, I think it was 13 generations of doctors, right? So he had this incredible knowledge of physical movement and martial application and all of this medical stuff about how to use Neigong and stuff like that to heal. So he put all that into this Wu style, and also all the meditation stuff that he learned from Zhu Baozhen and other people in Magui for the meditation in Bagua, and put all that in there. And, so this thing that he sort of gave to Bruce at the end of his life that he called the Wu style was really an amalgamation of a lot of things that he put into this.
Right.
But
it was his masterpiece.
Yeah. But I mean, his movements are, different. And Bruce has changed it over the years to be, very different from what it was, in the late 80s, early 90s compared to, now. But that's just how things go, but it is that compare. I mean, the only Yang style I've done is the Chen Manching stuff. So that's not really a great example either, because that's also a bit of a black sheep, right? I mean, because essentially what Chen Manching is doing is he's doing Yang style, but he's using that same kind of smaller frame.
Yeah. It's got that ultra soft, small body. Yeah, upper body, super limp, loose arms, kind of.
So he's not doing the small frame on the bottom. He's doing the small frame on the top.
Interesting.
But Liu Hongzhi is kind of the opposite.
Yeah, right.
Liu Hongzhi does a small frame on the bottom and a large frame on the top.
His arms are sticking super far out. Yeah.
And so it's just a kind of. But I also think that just has to do with the individual more than the style, because
absolutely
nobody really does it exactly the way anyone else does it, and it's just sort of that's how new styles get created. I mean, it's gotten to the point where there are people now who refer to Chen Manching's form as the Chen Manching style. And they stopped calling it the Yang style because it is different enough that you can make an argument that it's not the same thing, And so I think most of that is pointless. Personally, I think the best form is the one you. The best form is the one that you practice, right? I mean, if you have a form that you like and it's the one that gets you out of bed and you want to do it, that's the best
That's the one you best be doing.
Like
exactly,
because I think it really comes down to you can put anything into any form. And
the Tai Chi classics work for all the systems.
Yeah, I mean, Bawa says that over and over about how the outside shape doesn't matter. Bruce says it too. The outside form doesn't matter. Tai Chi is Tai Chi. And if you follow the principles, whether you're doing Yang or Chen or Wu, it's Tai Chi. If you're not following the principles, you're not doing Tai Chi no matter what you call it.
Right. And it could be something great, but it ain't Tai Chi. So the next thing I was going to write here, just to mention, he emphasizes that this Wu Jien Chuan had more of the old knowledge of fighting applications as opposed to Yang Cheng Fu's form, which is taught more for health or whatever. I don't know. Like you said, you haven't done a ton of Yang, and that's mostly what I've done. And none of the teachers I trained with were knowledgeable about fighting very much. So I guess the most applications I have done would be with like you and Kumar, I think, in terms of.
I mean, I don't know. I think some of that is that the Wu style didn't spread as far in some ways, so that the part it was easier to keep it intact.
Right, like hippies in America were primarily doing Yang style, and that's how I first ran across it. Right.
I mean,
that's just the most of what there is. We're thinking of one where like you were supposed to push the person, but you didn't just get to push them. You had two people holding your knees and someone else on your tailbone to like make sure you were doing it the right way. He always loves to do that because and I think it's genius. Like it's really important to have someone physically help you find the right position.
Feedback mechanism.
Feedback, yes, that's the genius of fighting applications.
Well, that's what I was just going to say is you can do it two ways. Well, I guess you can do it three ways. You can do it with, the form itself, which is probably the least effective. You can do it with the form and an application. That's pretty good. And then you can do it, the form, the application, and then trying to do the application with somebody making it so you have to do the application correctly. Right. So a good example is, say you're doing a pung to rollback kind of thing, right? That when you're just doing it as a technique, you're not really going to be paying attention to whether or not your knees are collapsing because you're going to be worried about getting hit in the face.
Right.
If somebody's got their hand on your knee and then you try to block somebody's punch, you're going to notice, oh, my knee is actually collapsing when I do this technique. I mean, so again, it's just about feedback, but I think it is really why, his method of teaching, if you do it right, it is very effective. I mean, it's not quick. It doesn't go by fast, but you get how to do a martial art safely is really the thing of it, that how to apply the Neigong into martial arts so you can use the Neigong in a pinch, not just when you're going slow, right? Or when you have, somebody throwing a fake ass punch at you and you can stop and they're not going to clobber you,
Right.
That's not fighting. That's
practice.
But the application part of it, I mean, a big part of that is it's a feedback mechanism and it's a muscle memory thing, right? Like you do, even if you don't do Tai Chi as a martial art, like you're not trying to go and beat up King Kong, knowing what the context of the movement is in terms of application is just a good memory tool, right? Like it's a good way of memorizing what it is you're trying to do, where your hands are supposed to be, where your body is supposed to be, and all this. So like, I mean, again, depends on what your teacher's interests are. I mean, when I was learning from Bruce, his interest was primarily still martial arts. So we were getting thumped around in the Tai Chi class. There wasn't a lot of this, sitting around talking about, energy flows and all that. I mean, there was some of that, but that was only to make you better at doing the martial stuff. It wasn't to
I mean, his classes, the mix has maybe changed, but there's always physical mechanics, energy work, two-person training, forms, like fighting, a little meditation. There's always some of everything in the process of his teaching.
There's
three. Nice. I like it though.
There's sort of, I just always think of it's a pyramid, right? There's martial arts, meditation, and let's call it fitness or health, right? So all Tai Chi, all martial arts use one or two or three of those, right? I mean, so
which one's the base? Yeah.
Most, modern martial arts are health and recreation first, martial arts second, and maybe a little bit of spiritual meditation stuff third. And like when I started with Bruce, that was the order of things. It was like you did the martial arts was your primary practice, and Qigong and meditation were to make you better at the primary one, right? Then the thing somewhere in the mid 90s, it rotated and it became, okay, now health is the main practice. So, having a healthy body, being good at Neigong is the main thing, right? Martial arts are a way of testing that thing, and then meditation is a side thing if you choose to go down that path. And then recently it's clicked again, and now meditation, spirituality is the focus, and health is the secondary thing. And then, oh, by the way, this can also be used as a martial art, which that's just a function of people getting older and having different interests.
Absolutely, it's a natural progression, I'd think, and Tai Chi's uniquely able to supply that more than a lot of martial arts, I'd say.
Yeah, well, I mean, to me, that's the cool thing about the internal martial arts is they don't, it's not written in stone which one of the way that those three things go. You can
adjust it as needed.
And that really accounts for a lot of the differences in how people do things. I mean, if you're more interested in health, it's very different training than if you're doing it for martial arts or for meditation. So,
yeah. So you get a little bit of everything. All right. Well, on to the Tai Chi Lun.
All right, let's do it.
Turning our attention to Baihua's book, Uncovering the Secrets of Internal Power in Tai Chi Chuan. We're on the Tai Chi Chuan treatise, and the discussion has led to this point here. You should stand upright like a scale, and your limbs should be flexible and round like a wagon wheel. And this is a Tai Chi statement that's been going around forever, of emphasizing that uprightness and yet at the same time the rounded movements. So he says, in order to produce the advantage of strength and controlling the distance and the timing, The body posture and movement of taking his flexion and extension as my flexion and extension must conform to the principle of leveling. So you've got to be able to very flexibly transform between empty and solid. So that's what he's calling leveling, as in terms of what a scale would do, I think is what he means.
Yeah, it's like, leveling balance, right? I mean,
right. That's what they talk about scale. You're talking about balancing weights in staying balanced while there's weight being applied, basically.
Scale doesn't work if it doesn't have a stable point,
Right. So you're going to get an advantage by using this leveling concept. So he says, when the opponent attacks, I correspondingly start partially sink my strength, not going against the opponent's strength. If I resisted the force, then that would be a double weighted situation. And then the way of strength would stagnate and come to a halt. So basically he's saying you'd clash if you resisted their attack, and you'd use both your feet kind of to push against it. Whereas he prefers, when opponent attack, I sink my weight a little bit and let the opponent's strength sort of get its way and take advantage of that somehow.
Yeah, I mean, basically it's you don't resist their force, you sink it, and that creates a jing, right? So previously he talked about how internal force needs a stimuli, right? Like, I can't use my internal power if nothing pushes on me, basically, right? There needs to be something from the outside coming in to give me something to work against, right?
Right.
I can use my own strength to go out, but I can't, there has to be some stimuli to me to use my internal strength, right? So
yeah,
if you meet that thing that's coming at you with equal and strength, you just have what's called a double weighted situation. Even if you're only meeting it with one hand, it's the fact that the double weight in this context is two opponents smashing into each other.
Not 2 feet, right? But 2 different people. Yeah. So he says that every time I see people who've been practicing for many years but still can't use softening, most of them expose their weakness and are controlled by others. It is because they have not realized they have committed the fault of double weight.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
They don't realize they're pushing when they're pushing, is what he's saying.
So it's sort of unconscious tension and strength that you're using, rather than relying on shifting your weight and letting the opponent's force sort of pass you by so you can set them up.
Yeah,
use their force, use their extension as your extension.
This is the Li versus Jing thing, right? The external strength versus internal strength. You're not trying to use your external strength, you're trying to use your internal strength. So,
and to do that, you can't clash.
Right. You need their energy essentially to enter your body a little bit. And that's the part about, he says, partial sinking, right? Because I don't want to let you all the way in. I don't want my arm to collapse and my body to sink and collapse and fold. I just want to go down a little bit to kind of take that pressure into my legs instead of my upper body.
So the next thing he says is the prerequisite for action is balance. If there's no balance, there's no basis for stable activity. However, balance and activity are contradictory. If you don't take initiative to disrupt the balance, you can't move on your own. For example, when we walk, we have to sway. So you have to break your balance in order to move through space. Yeah. He says the center of gravity and the jing of stepping are on different legs. This phenomenon is called partial sinking. There is solidity in void. There is void in solidity. So he's making that point, like, you need balance, but you also have to be able to take initiative and disrupt the balance so that you can move through space and, like, not just be stuck in one spot. It's like one of your legs has the center of gravity and holds it in space. The other leg is expressing the outward force or outward movement of stepping. So one leg does the stepping, the other does the rooting. Both don't root at the same time, is my impression of what he's saying here.
So the first part where he says the prerequisite for action is balance, right? Basically that in order to move, you have to be stable, right? Because otherwise you're going to plop. You're going to fall over, right?
You're imbalanced.
So basically the idea that when we walk normally, we kind of lumber, we fall essentially because we don't have something else pushing us along, right? So the only thing,
sort of throw yourself off balance and land.
You have to use a little bit of inertia or get yourself going.
So the next paragraph, he says, double weight means that the center of gravity and the jing are evenly distributed. This is inflexible and can only be stable in one direction. In this case, it is easy to be controlled by the opponent. Since people have only two legs, if the center of gravity and strength are evenly distributed, they can only support two sides. Using the domination of the waist, the continuous internal connection, and solidity and emptiness will provide support in all 8 directions.
Right. So now he's giving you the other conditions for, to be successful, right?
Okay.
So you've got, the dominating of the waist is one. So
that's a Tai Chi obsession. The waist is the commander. They always say that.
That's the using your dandian as the center thing that he was obsessed about, right? Where is it?
Continuous internal connection.
This is my favorite, right? Continuous internal connection. It's the phrase Wu Jien Chuan. This is the string of 9 pearls.
Right.
But the word string and the word 9 aren't in
we've discussed,
aren't in the phrase.
But for some reason in English it is that phrase.
So I've taken to using the phrase coordinated body movement, right? All right, so that's the Wu Jien Chuan. That's the internal connection, and then the last one is this ability to go empty and full, right? So that's that once you have a connection, right, a strong, solid connection, that you can instantaneously move it from one side to the other, and that there isn't a break.
The one thing that you can't do is evenly distribute both.
Right.
Everything into both sides equally. Then you become a statue. You need to continuously be in a state of change, basically. From empty to full and full to empty. You never stop.
Right. What happens to the scale when it has even weight on both sides? It stops moving, right?
True.
So in a sense, what you're always trying to achieve in this is the phrase I like is continuous motion, constant stability. It's always moving. But it's always constant, right? And that's where things like walking are kind of the main practice for that.
Absolutely. No, it's huge. So we moved back to the next piece in the Taiji Chuan Lun, which recalls what we're just talking about here. He says, some people work very hard and practice Taiji Chuan for several years in accordance with the requirements. In the end, the main reason for still losing to an opponent is through his analysis of this wrong habit of double weighting. Is that his analysis of this wrong habit of double weighting is not thorough enough. As a result, there are still many double weights existing within the continuous internal connection. The yin and yang complement each other. This is the way of comprehending force. To avoid this kind of mistake, we must understand that yin and yang assist each other. Although the concepts of yin and yang are relative, they are also mutually assisting. They rely on mutual support. It will not make sense if lacking or adding any aspect. Each part of the continuous internal connection in the body should be carefully analyzed, permuted, and combined according to the above-mentioned concept of yin and yang assisting each other. It is necessary to understand that the clearer the division of yin and yang, the more naturally the yin and yang will be assisted, and the more effective it will be. Mastering the above requirements is called comprehending force, aka Jing.
The 8 force Jing is another name.
I said that before.
And it's that just continuously looking at what you're doing from a perspective of like, did I get it all? Did I feel my foot when I did that?
Yeah.
Did I
all the different pearls on the string have to be carefully analyzed and comprehended, and yet they're all connected and unified as one. All right, let's finish it up next time.
Okay, man. Talk to you soon. Hey, folks. Thanks for listening. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Just a reminder, go over to our Patreon to hear the extended episode as well as a bonus episode. We also have interviews up there as well as exclusive content. All right. Thanks for listening. Thanks for your support. Take care of yourselves and be well.